I'm going to touch on, just give you a background on what NCPC is, and then give you a very academic description of what resource efficiency and cleaner production is all about. It's a fairly new concept globally, so it is not yet well defined. And then a few examples of activities that we do within the center. The NCPC, it's a program of the Department of Trade and Industry, and it's hosted by the CSIR. We are a member of the Global Resource Efficiency and Cleaner Production Network, and in Africa it has chapters in all the continents, and in Africa we also have, in Latin America and Africa, we also have the African Roundtable on Sustainable Consumption and Production, because RECP, it's practically the same as saying sustainable consumption and production, but RECP is a trade and investment or industry way of saying SCP within the 10-year framework of programs or the newly defined Sustainable Development Goals. And the concept aims at enhancing industrial competitiveness and efficiency as a way of helping industry with doing more with less. So you become more productive, you become more competitive, but you use less resources. RCP services are currently all subsidized because the DTI sees this as a way of facilitating incentives to industry. So most of the things that we do are fully subsidized or almost subsidized. And the basic of what we do is we do industrial impact assessment. We assess the company. We are at a company level assessing what are the challenges with your use of water, energy, material, and waste generation in a production system. And we recommend measures to close the gaps that are identified, or best available technology that could be used to improve the competitiveness and the efficiency of the company. Simply, what we do talks to environmental sustainability or environmental friendly alignment of the industry to local policy. It talks to climate change in terms of industrial efficiency, or now we are talking about, globally we are talking about issues of low carbon economy and climate resilience industrialization. It talks to issues of how competitive it's your manufacturing industry in South Africa as compared to, if you listen to what Conrad or Jono was talking about, it's about our ability or the ability for South African industry to compete and on par with their peers, either from the BRICS countries or from countries in transition, or compete with, normally we compare ourselves with developed nations. You rarely hear South Africa being compared to India or Brazil or China or Thailand or of the Philippines or Vietnam. You will always hear comparison between South Africa and Britain or UK or Netherlands. And that's why some of the statistics will always come up as the worst off in some things. Now, basically, the biggest activities that we have done on waste, water, materials, and energy. And you'll realize energy comes up as the most element that was given or that received the most attention, because in the last, since 2006, basically, South Africa has had enormous activities within the energy sector, specifically with the electrical energy sector. And because of that, most of our efforts by DTI and Department of Energy, we were advised to give more attention to that area of industrialization processes. So energy will have a bigger output in numbers and also in investments. For example, if you look at the last 10 years, in terms of previous, this is the previous statistics, last financial statistics, potential savings in the 5 or 6 sectors that we focused on. And here is the potential savings in terms of rents, and these are the sectors, and with the smallest impact on commercial buildings, and this is because we decided to not put much effort, and this constitutes mainly your shopping centers, your malls, and a few banks and hospitals. But majority of efforts went into the most stressed sectors. That's clothing, textile, food, leather, and textile, automotive, metals. And when you talk manufacturing, this is where most of the manufacturing activities are happening. And this is potentially showing that if you apply resource efficiency and cleaner production methodologies or techniques, we were able to save the number of, I think there were about 80 textile companies involved, and we were able to recover about 71 million rands in value. And in the metal sector, there were about 22 companies with 37 million rand recovery. And this is money at a potential saving. It means we had not gone back and verified that these companies really achieved the amount of rands savings that we had identified. And potential savings per thematics. Now, RCP, for it to work effectively, we have decided to divide it into 4 themes. And it's basically energy, water, materials, and waste. And if you use the themes to look at the potential savings from this slide, this is what we find, that in rands value and in years of work that we did from 2009 to 2015, water as the biggest, energy, which has the biggest output, and then water, materials. And you would agree that these two are very related, because for every kilowatt hour of energy, there would be a ton of material that needs to be processed in a plant. Of course, at the end, the kilowatt hour and the energy that is, the kilowatt hour of energy and the material that is processed will relate to the amount of waste that generated and the amount of water that is input into the plant. For example, technology arrived at my house very late, so bear with me. Now, if you look at the level of energy activities, in the industrial energy efficiency project is what we call the intervention that we applied to industry. And this is nationally. And we're looking at sustainable transformation of the practice and activities and behavior by industry and how they use and value the use of energy in their production system. And it's basically coming from an attitude that says, if you use 10 rand equivalent of kilovolts of energy, you will add that 10 rand in the product, and customers or consumers will pay for that. And we are saying we need to have a transformation in the attitude of how you cost your product that allows industry to see the value of all their inputs. And energy is the biggest input. I'm looking for a pointer. An energy management system and energy optimization is a process where we look at when the material comes into a plant and material goes out of a plant, the amount of energy that got engaged in the processing of the product, and the amount of energy that is required to dispose the waste from the product. Now, there are 2 levels of waste generation here. There's the waste during production and waste after the use of the product. And that is systems optimization. Building capacity in industry to implement energy. Now, one of the challenges in the world in the last 5 years was that there were no clearly defined basic learning modules on energy systems optimization, because it was easy to just remove an air conditioner and put a new one, or to service it. But with the introduction of a new concept called remanufacturing, and amazingly, 50% of products, especially cement in the latest Siemens report, 50% of CAT scans and medical products from South Africa have been remanufactured and sold as second-hand equipment to mostly Asian countries. And in South Africa, because of the mindset and the attitude we have, we always go for brand new CAT scans in industry. And the question is, what is the impact of not remanufacturing or retrofitting our systems to comply with latest specifications on energy in the medical field, in the automotive field, or chemicals or pharmaceutical field? One of the offerings we also give to align to the top 4 is systems optimization in energy management systems. We were used as a guinea pig by the United Nations to develop an ISO 50001 standard, which is now officially a SANAS standard. And the ISO 50001, for good interest, there are about 32 companies in the world, and 5 of those are in South Africa that are ISO 50001. And it's mainly driven from global trends and global market innovative access to markets initiatives. And the numbers in what we have done, for example, this is typically what we then take and give to DTI or to Energy Department or to Environmental Affairs, is that of the 153 companies that we conducted energy audits and ran them as demonstration projects, we were able to save about 1,300 gigawatts of energy. This relates to 1.2 tons of carbon dioxide emitted by South Africa, and it also relates to 1.1 billion rands of energy savings. Now, these are audited figures of the activities that we have done in the energy space. So if you go to ArcelorMittal, you go to Toyota, or you go to a pharmaceutical company like Aspen, they will give you figures that when you add, gives you this kind of statistics. It also, interestingly, by saving 1.3 gigawatts of energy, you could technically electrify 180,000 mid-income. So you could, if you are a Tshwane resident, we could electrify Olivenbosch Township by the work that was done. 5,000 jobs were retained or were saved because of the activities. 2,600 trained experts. And this is one of the greatest output that we did, because these guys are now used globally and in the continent to equip other NCPCs and other companies outside South Africa on how to become energy efficient. Of the 2,600, 101 of those are experts that we are using globally right now. 43 are certified ENMS or ISO. You know, when you want to, a company wants to be ISO certified or SANA certified, the person that does that needs to be credited. So the people that were credited came from this program. 231 SMME energy audits were then performed. Now, this number and that number, although the 153 exist in that number, it means all those numbers went for energy audit, but these were on small enterprises, and that looks at the big enterprises that we do, so you don't get confused on what we are referring to. We looked at potential savings identified from this number at 11.5 million per year. And we're in a process of verifying or auditing the figures to get the actual figures. Okay, now in terms of waste, we're using a methodology or a technique called industrial symbiosis. Jono spoke about it briefly. And the idea of industrial symbiosis is that we're looking at profit, sales, new jobs, utilization of assets, innovation, learning, and knowledge transfer. Now, let me simplify it my way. You set up a Johannesburg Stock Exchange that does trading on a daily basis, but this trading it's on waste only. So a company next to Kalafong Hospital generates steams out of their production system, and they flare the steam. Instead of flaring the steam, we talk to the hospital and say, instead of burning coal to generate steam, you now buy the steam from the same cost of the coal. You buy the steam from this company next door, and the company is incentivized to keep the steam from not going into the atmosphere, but going into the hospital. The hospital still get the same quality of steam, and you put in technology like pinch heaters or necessary technology to filter the steam to have the right quality for theater operations use, or for sterilization use, or for normal heating of the ward. So you basically create a platform for that trade process to happen. And we are hoping that with the discussions we're having with the JSE, like what happened in the NCPC in the UK, spoke to, what's the JSE in London called? London Stock Exchange. They spoke to them. Now you have a platform in London Stock Exchange that company don't have to go to the NCPC, they just go register in the stock exchange and you do trade. So you raise your hand and say, I'm producing too much steam, or I'm producing too much paper, and I need someone to come and buy my paper. I'm producing too much plastics. So that's the simplification of industrial symbiosis. On a practical sense, we are saying, for example, this company, Cabo Timber Structure, is a family company based in the Western Cape. They make pallets for Coca-Cola, SAB Miller, for Tiger Brands, and the global logistics company. Okay, leave it. And these guys had a plantation almost just outside Neisner. A plantation that they own, the farm that they planted eucalyptus species. Now we say to them, do you really need to waste money looking after your plantation? That's a Sapi and Mondi job. We can introduce you to 45 guys in the Western Cape that have waste pallets. And this guy initially was skeptical. He's turned about 30 tons of wood pallets that were going into the Cape Town landfill site, returned them, and this is a picture of his first production of pallets from waste. And he's telling us the family is now selling their plantation because they don't see value of owning a plantation anymore. That has other implication though. And we're saying we have removed this waste from going into the landfill site. We have created a 60% output. I was impressed with these guys because he immediately increased his labor by 40% because he needed more people to go to these 40 companies, 30 companies to collect that. And he set them up because it's a family company and they don't want to be BEE'd by having blacks buying shares. They went for the other alternative schemes of BEE. So he incentivized 4 guys, gives them bakkies, gives them an income, and say, your job is to collect and bring to me. And they became a BEE level 3 out of that. So there are other alternative ways of looking at these options. Now, in terms of water, business is increasingly committed to use of scarce resources wisely. Not only because of compliance needs, but also because of pressure from resources availability in the country. And our audits identified that areas of improvements and the recommendations that we make without capacity building, or they need capacity building in water efficiency for their management principles or change management systems to become effective. For example, a company called Sundale is a free-range dairy company was my first time to know there's free range and non-free range dairy. But what we found was that we focused in the process UV installation and ozonated water for their quality of lifespan of their milk required a lot of water, and that water had to be sterilized or changed forms in one way or another. And you're looking at long-term potential reduction in municipal water supply of 75%. We also looked at projected savings directly from minimum assessment of 1.3 million per annum. We reduced their steam by 50%. They were almost less than 3 kilometers away from your Simba Chips Lace, I think, Lace plant. It's not Lace, but the Woolworth supplier of Wales. And these guys needed a lot of steam because some of their product is either cooked in oil or steamed for you to meet either a vegetarian or typical me carnivore. And so part of that went into creating new business opportunity for them. And part of that meant we now reduce their water intake. Investment in plant break. In 18 months, they had a break even in the investment and the reuse of water. And we also did a water footprinting. Few years ago, there was a complaint in Europe that our orange citrus products are not of quality. And this water footprinting was basically a solution to the black spot and finding an orange which does not have vitamin C because of the amount of when the orange has gone through so much chemical processing as a tree, and it ends up not being an orange anymore. Opportunities to improve. Yeah, it's serious because we tell people HIV positive and sick eat fruits and vegetables, and we don't look at the. Now, what we were looking at with these products is for those of us that likes champagne and Monis, 120 liters to make your bottle, and we were looking at 140 liters for the coffee guys. And this was a study on low carbon economy in the meat industry. This steak was on its way to Japan, and it cost about 1,500 equivalent rands in Japan when you buy it. And it's one of our biggest export thing that you should be proud we're exporting as South Africans. But the water used in that, Japan was not happy. So we looked at 15,000 liters of water that we were concerned. Because of all these things, this is my last slide, we ended up setting up a center, in the center, an activity specifically for skills development and training, because the concept is new. So you don't necessarily have a BTech or a BSc or a BEng student produced with a RECP specialization. You only get that from a master's to a PhD level. So we had to set up a capacity building, skills development training. I showed you on the other slide how many trainees we had. And right now, together with the Energy SETA and the MESITA and ISET SETA, because of CSIR, we're now working on a process where we're even setting up a professional body that once you get accredited as an RSCP specialist, you would then have to be registered and adhere to certain standards and norms. The same way as you are an engineering or you are a scientist registered person. Thank you so much. I still wanted to talk.